Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Susan Barber, and I'm the Community Education Manager at Mission Hospice and Home Care. And for those that are not familiar with us, we're a smallish, not-for-profit, community-based hospice program that's located in San Mateo County, and we serve San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. And those are the two counties just below San Francisco. So we're kind of wedged in between San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And we serve a very diverse population of people, from migrant farm workers living down on the coast to Silicon Valley executives. And we have been part of the San Mateo community for 42 years. We were founded in 1979 by two women who lived in our community, one of whom became our first patient, and she died in 1979. And since that time, we have served thousands of families in our community. So we welcome you all here. I know that we have a very big sense of community now on Zoom, because we have people not just from our service area, but around the country. And it would be wonderful if people wanted to put up in the chat where it is that you're Zooming in from. I also just want to say that there's going to be, Mirabai is going to talk for about an hour about her book and her life. And then we are going to have an open Q&A. And one of our community ambassador volunteers, Barbara, is going to be helping us. So if you are able to, if you have a question that comes up, instead of interrupting, we'll have the question, the Q&A in the last half hour. So from 5 to 5:30. Please do put in the chat. You can start with questions so that we know that it's a question you're asking. And then Barbara and I will be monitoring that. And we'll also have an opportunity for people just to actually raise their hand and speak to Mirabai in person. So I'm just so grateful, Mirabai, to you for being willing to do this. I've heard about Mirabai Bush's work probably since the mid-'80s, when I first became acquainted with Stephen and Andrea Levine, and Mirabai and Ram Dass have been working together, had worked together for most of their life, it sounds like, maybe lifetimes, actually. So Mirabai and Ram Dass have a beautiful book, Walking Each Other Home, and this is a phrase that is used often in hospice, and I don't know that it's attributed to Ram Dass as often as it might be, or to Mirabai, but she's going to be discussing this book with us today. Mirabai, in addition to being an author of this book, is an author of many books. She has been working, I think I was reading your bio, Mirabai, and I was just thinking that you've probably trained with more spiritual teachers than I have ever heard of or knew existed. And it's just fascinating that you have such a diverse spiritual background in terms of so many different traditions that you've been involved with. I just would like for Mirabai to introduce herself, because her background spans just about everything that anybody can think about doing. And I would not begin to do it justice. In addition, Mirabai is hosting a podcast, and we're going to send information out to everybody after this is over. There'll be an evaluation that we hope you complete, as well as resources that are mentioned. And I do want to say, just as we go forward, Mirabai, I'm going to be making you a co-host, and then I am going to also be muting everybody else, so nobody like me unmutes, not on purpose, but accidentally. So Mirabai, I'm going to turn this Zoom over to you. Thank you so very much for your generosity and offering this to our community.
Thank you. Just a moment. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And I am actually in Western Massachusetts. You can see out the window. But I've spent so much time in the Bay Area and south of the Bay. Well, I was going to say where you all are until I saw that the chats coming up, and it turns out we're all over the place. So that's great. But I do. My last trip, my last flight was in March, coming home from San Francisco. And I've been missing it ever since. And as I'll tell you in my bio, I have spent pretty much time in Silicon Valley developing a meditation program for Google, and spending time in Stanford and so on, So yeah, it's just great to know you all are there. And we here had a big, intense storm yesterday, and there was hail in some places it was snow, and then there was huge wind, and 3 trees came down. So New England's wonderful, but you do have to accept things as they come here. um, so yeah, this is the book, and I wrote it with Ramdas, and I'll tell you why. Ramdas died last year, but about a year and a half ago now, and we uh, uh, fortunately finished the book before he went. But and we had been friends for 50 years before writing the book. I had gone to India in 1970. I was remembering today, it's Earth Day. I remember planting a tree on the very first Earth Day in 1970. I hope it's still growing somewhere in Buffalo. But so I went to India at that time. I'd been teaching, and that was a period of intense anti-war activity, civil rights activity. I was very involved in all of that. And I wanted to see if there was a way to live on this planet that was more sane, more compassionate than what we were experiencing in this country. So I went to India, and with not really a very clear idea about why I was going. I was more about leaving here for a while. And I hadn't ever really heard of meditation or anything before that. But anyhow, I got there. And the second day I was there, I heard about a retreat that was being offered for Westerners, we were called then, in which this Burmese Buddhist teacher was teaching meditation to Westerners for the first time. And I went, and there I met Ramdas and many other people who came back and became teachers in this country, and who became friends of mine for a long time. But and then I stayed. I thought I was going to stay in India for 2 weeks. I stayed for 2 years because I was so moved by what happened to me in that monastery. How looking within, which I had never considered being. I was in the 4th year of my PhD. I was always looking out. I'd read, hundreds of books from other people's minds. That looking within really could lead us to an understanding of what we're doing here on this planet and how to do it. So, and then after that, for those of you who know who Ramdas is, or I went with him and some others and met his teacher, who we called Maharaji, Neem Karoli Baba. And he was so extraordinary. He was, in the context of what we're talking about tonight, he was really beyond birth and death. He was, I just had never experienced another human who was so utterly present. And I just felt like being around him, I was glimpsing such an expanded possibility of what it means to be human, what we can be. My ideas before that were so small. And not that, these 50 years later, I've fulfilled that vision, but it's always been out there that there is a way of being here that recognizes how we are all interconnected with each other, with nature, with the divine, and how everything is impermanent and we are all going to die. So I came back from India, as a group of us did, just full of this new understanding and wanting to. Most of the others became teachers, but I was pregnant when I came back. I was married and pregnant, and and then I had the baby. And so in those years, I add this for just a little note on women, and all of our roles, that there were very few women teachers of any of these practices, for one thing, and also nobody could put together the idea of learning a meditation practice and having a baby. Those did not go together. And so I had to figure out another way to live a life based on what I had experienced. And so I, with my husband then, started a business. And, um, and we brought this, what we called right livelihood, or this kind of um, compassionate business practices, um, into this organization, and did that for about 10 years. And it became, by chance, I think, quite successful. And after that, with some other friends who I'd been in India with, came back, and wanting to give back in some way to the cultures of India and Nepal, who had really supported us, allowed us to live there. And while we were going through all these changes and discovering all these teachers, um, uh, and some of these folks were medical and had worked on the end of smallpox campaign in the 70s. And we started an international public health foundation called Seva, which is housed in Berkeley, and which means service in Sanskrit. And our main focus was blindness in Asia, or unnecessary blindness in Asia. And we restored sight. Well, many of you are in the Bay Area. I'll say that we didn't have any money in the beginning at all, and we raised our money through rock and roll. The Grateful Dead was the house band, and we raised money that way. And then Ram Dass was also part of it. Would give talks and charge $5 or $10 then, and we restored sight to still going, 5 million people in Asia who would otherwise not be able to see. And we integrated these practices and understanding into the way that we did all of that work. And then, so Ram Dass and I did a lot together. Then for 10 years, I worked with Mayan people in Guatemala through that, through Seva, and in village community development. And he did some of that with me. And then, so after that, I started the Center for Contemplative Mind and Society, which was an organization to bring these practices into mainstream secular organizations, everything from law to business to the army to philanthropy, all kinds of places. So I say all that long story to say that now, we said before, I'm just entered my 9th decade, that it seems like what to do now. When I was young, I brought up a child and started a business and this and that. And now it's time. It was time to think about aging and dying. So, but I happened to be visiting Ram Dass. He lived in Maui. I'll tell you some more about that. And he said, I just arrived that day, and he said, I want you to write my last book with me. And I said, when I looked back on it, I thought it was funny. I said, of course. I had no idea what it was going to be. I said, what's it about? He said, dying. I said, okay. And he said, this time we have a real deadline. So, and we did. And he died like a year after it came out. And I'll just say quickly, for those of you who don't know who Ram Dass was, um, he uh, he wrote a book called Be Here Now, which is still selling. It sold millions of copies and it's still selling. It's amazing. But he was, he grew up in a upwardly mobile, successful Jewish family in Boston. His father was a founder of Brandeis and a friend of Einstein's. And then Ram Dass became a psychologist and taught at Stanford and at Harvard. And then he was with Timothy Leary. They were most interested in consciousness, and they started exploring psychedelics. And at a certain point, he gave one of these psychedelics to one of his graduate students. It's a longer story than that, but and he was fired from Harvard, and so was Tim. And after that, he went to India, and he really wanted to. He also recognized that through psychedelics, he had glimpsed ways of being, states of mind, an understanding of the world but he felt like through the psychedelics, he had to keep going up and coming down, and that he wanted to live in that space. So he went to India, he discovered teachers, and one main teacher named Mirabai Bush, and he learned practices, and then he came back to this country and he wrote Be Here Now. And then, so from the time when we came back, he, like I did, looked around for all these ways. Mirabai Bush had told us, we asked him, basically we're asking him, what should we do with our lives? What is the deepest teaching that you can give us? And he said, love everyone and serve everyone. So then we had to figure out like what that meant in all these different contexts. And so Ram Dass did a lot of service. And one of the first things he did was work with Stephen and Andrea Levine and others to form one of the really early hospices. And he got very enthusiastic about it. This is going to be, it's really going to be like a monastery, everybody's going to be doing practices and working on themselves. And it's going to be utterly different from, he had gone through his mother's death in a hospital and wanted the idea of hospice to be utterly different. They got a house, which later, grew into the San Francisco Zen Center Hospice, and they brought in 6 or 8 people, and then time went by, and they were doing all these things, and it just went by, and every time we'd ask him, how's it going, Ram Dass? And he said, it's great, everybody's there and they're all happy. And what happened was that nobody died, because they actually were really happy. I mean, they eventually died, but they didn't die when they thought they were going to die. We said we weren't sure whether that was a sign of success or failure. But so he worked a lot with AIDS patients in San Francisco in the 80s, and so. And then in 96, he had a massive stroke. And from that time on, he has lived in Maui. And he recovered. He has aphasia, so there would be long silences between his words. But his mind, with aphasia, your mind is still clear, but it's putting it into words that's difficult. But he recovered more than any of his doctors had ever seen happen, So And during those years in Maui, looking at the ocean, as many of you can also do, um, he just got um, really more and more, um, connected with spirit, more and more present, more. Um, he he would say that he was becoming love. And I watched over all these years, people would arrive to see him and he just like beam out love. It was really quite tangible and really amazing. And then as I would watch people respond to that love, I see myself responding to it. The best feeling in the world to be unconditionally loved. We all have had moments of it, or we might have had a dog, but it's rare. Um, and I'll just say before I get onto the rest that um, he then, so we wrote this book, and the idea was, I said, you've written about dying for 50 years. And I went back and I looked at Be Here Now, and it was kind of all there already. The words were all there. He said, and he wrote a book on aging called Still Here. But he said, yeah, I know the words were there, but now I've lived it and I know it in a different way. We understand what that means. So he said, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it from who I am now. And so we made this agreement that it was a series of conversations in his room. And we made the agreement that we would tell each other, we would say what we know and not say what we don't know. So we would catch ourselves in each other. He had more of a career in speaking than I, but still, when you've been saying the same things over and over for years, it just comes rattling out. And we really tried to not fall into that, but to listen to every word. And is it true right now? Do I really know that? There are a lot of things we can all say about death and after death that we don't really know. Let's just say what we know. That was our agreement. And it was a great gift. And since then, I've said that I didn't think I had many reservations about dying. I mean, I didn't have any big fears about dying. I didn't have any big regrets. Forgiveness I hadn't done. But the more we talked about it, the more I realized, of course, I have fears. And of course I had stuff that I hadn't looked at, or things that I had remembered in a certain way that turned out to be not really quite like that, and were seen in a different way from the people I was involved with. So among other things, I'm married to my third husband. So you can imagine that there were a few hurt feelings along the way. So we did that. And the great gift was that I had to keep bringing it into mind for 2 years. And when we talked, and then I'd go home and work it into a book. And I just say that to everyone now because it's something we can all do. Many of you work in hospice, so it's right there in front of you. But sometimes when that's true, we're actually not really being with it in a way quietly enough that we can see what's still there that we need to let go of. I'm actually in a group now, a Zoom group, with a number of Buddhist women teachers over 75. Anyhow, we have been taught, needless to say, we've been talking about aging and dying. And we've been doing this practice together. One of them, you Bay Area folks might know is Sylvia Borstein, who teaches at Spirit Rock. But we've been doing this practice now in which we just, like before you go to sleep or when you wake up, you're just lying there still in bed and taking a few deep, quieting breaths. And then telling yourself, I'm dying. And allowing yourself to believe that in that moment, you are dying. And then notice what comes up. You know, sometimes it just, you think you're cool, and then just like a moment of panic arises, you know. And then just looking at what's there. And then sometimes doing a practice is one of Ram Dass's favorites, practices, which is I am not these eyes and what they see. I am loving awareness. You go through your body. I am not this nose and what it smells. I am loving awareness. This mouth and what it tastes. I am loving awareness. Just keep doing that. And then I am not this body. I am loving awareness. And then allowing yourself to think that you're dying and seeing what comes up in that space when you're not all attached to all the things of this world and you are, you know, resting in awareness. Are you less afraid to die? So we've been having some really interesting conversations. It's an easy practice you can do at any time. See what happens. It's just an investigation. So this year, when we published the book 2 years ago, and then I talked about it. A lot of people wanted to hear because it was Ram Dass, although it was me. And but not everybody was really thinking that much about dying. And the book is called Conversations on Loving and Dying. But this COVID year, you know, in one way or another, we're all grieving. And many of us haven't been able to walk people we love home. My mother-in-law is in a nursing home, and there was a lot of COVID in the nursing home. We were not able to see her at all. No one was allowed in, and she's 90, and she tested positive, but she had no symptoms. It was, and she has 7 kids, and so she's always been surrounded by people, and you know, we got that glimpse of just who in this world ever dreamed you couldn't be close to someone you love when they're dying. Of course, if you could get there, you'd do it. Yeah, there's all kinds of grief this year. There's been something I never heard of before, but anticipatory grief, that all the things we thought we were going to do, and then they died. We couldn't do them. And we had to grieve for things that didn't happen as well as things that did happen. So yeah, coming to terms with dying is all about letting go of the way we want things to be, when and knowing that, you know, it's all impermanent and it's all, we have no idea what's going to happen in the next moment, and we're all connected to each other. I love that came out of COVID. You know, sometimes I would think, you know, a bat bit an animal somewhere, you know, in China, we think. But just one bat bit an animal, and we all were at risk of COVID. I mean, who could have, I mean, epidemiologists did imagine that, but for most of us, you know, I love that it was such a reminder that we really don't know what's going to happen in the next moment. And, you know, in all the Zen monasteries, there's always a sign that says, death comes without warning. And, you know, in Christian monasteries, you know, they often have someone walking through the halls saying, memento mori, remember that you will die. So I hope you're going to have questions at the end, because I've been really talking a lot. But I'm going to read you a couple of things from the book, and then we can have questions. There's so much. But, well, since so many of you are working in hospice, or, you know, at one time or another, almost all of us will be with someone who dies. I've only been with 2 people in my life, but if that's your profession, you're with a lot. But anyhow, we all will at some time or other be. And so Ram Dass had done that a lot and felt like some of his most important life experiences happened there. And so he wanted to talk about that, and he wanted to put this message out for people who are doing it. So I'll read this chapter. It's not very long. When we sit down again in his room after lunch, I ask Ram Dass, what else should we be saying about being with the dying? Learning to be a loving presence, he said, for the dying is a practice. You have to open to a deeper part of yourself. It helps to have training, but even if you don't, you can be a comforting presence, as I was when I first started doing this work. Then he talks for a long time again, giving more suggestions. Be natural and relaxed. Learn to feel comfortable with silence. Sit close to the person. They'll feel your presence. Just like in meditation, many thoughts and emotions will come up while you're sitting there. The practice is to notice what you're thinking and feeling, and without judging yourself, to bring your attention back to the person who is dying. The intimacy of the connection becomes a soul-to-soul lifeline. The quiet appreciation of the total situation and its possibilities steadily moves things forward. The challenge is to remain in a space of compassion, reverence for life, and acceptance of death, letting the dying person know that you know they are dying, and resting in loving awareness in communion with the one who is dying. As people move closer to dying, they often cope with questions about meaning and purpose. They may experience doubt, uncertainty, regret, sadness. We can't answer their questions, but we can listen carefully and give support as they work out answers for themselves. We listen to their beliefs, their fears, their dreams, their struggles, keeping a quiet, loving presence. If you're a family member or a loved one, it's important to say goodbye and to reassure the dying person that those left behind will miss them, but it will be all right. It's okay to let go. You're not alone. This loving reassurance, which releases the dying person from concern, is a great gift at this time. I say, people have told me they feel sometimes they feel they feel helpless when they're sitting with the dying. They think, why can't I stop this? Why can't I help? Am I doing the right thing? What do you do when that happens? Ram Dass said, it's about identifying with being rather than doing. The doctors and nurses are doing. You can just be there, a loving rock, loving awareness. The months when my sister Barbara was dying, I tell Ramdas, I kept having to let go of who she had been or who I thought she had been. Because of her dementia, she didn't always know who I was, but she knew I was close to her and she liked being with me. It was actually a great relief. Ramdas says, it's interesting to notice as loved ones change how much we often hold on to who they used to be. As people approach their death, they're changing very rapidly. You can practice imagining that you are meeting a dying friend or a loved one for the first time each time you visit them, giving up your expectations and judgments, not focusing on who they used to be, but who they are now, being there. Yes, I said, that's what it was like. Every day was different, new. Toward the end, she was quiet most of the time, and thoughts about death would arise for me. Will I die soon? Will I be ready? Will I know my granddaughter, Dahlia, well enough before I die? What happens after death, anyhow? Ramdas responds, being with the dying is a precious opportunity to learn about death, but only if you can let go of fear and anxiety. It's good to notice the sensations in your body as they begin to arise. Notice the fear and the thoughts attached to it. Pay attention. Let go. Remember your soul. Return to the dying person with loving awareness. Cultivate humility and equanimity. Humility in the face of mystery helps us with the frustration we often feel when we think we're supposed to know it all and be in control of it all, when really we're not. We're all merely instruments for the process to go on. You are only one part of the unfolding. Skipping. And it's important to take care of yourself. I bet that is something many of you have experienced, as everyone involved in service has. You've got to take care of yourself, especially when the process of dying is long. If you need to go for a walk, do. Don't feel guilty. What's most important is that you're fully there with the dying person. Ramdas says you can't take away death, but you can be there in love and comfort as the dying person goes through the changes that lead to death. Sit close enough so they feel your oneness. You're serving each other by helping each other let go of fear. Alone, it is a daunting task. Together, you enter something bigger than yourself. Love is more powerful than fear. And I'll read a few paragraphs about grief, since this is something I know we all know. Ramdas offers, grief is one of our greatest teachers. It cracks us open. It demands that we look at our relationship with life and our fear of death. It reveals the great healing power of love. My way of supporting grieving is to say, grieve. My God, grieve. Don't try to stop grieving. Don't pretend to have strength when you don't, because it looks good. Go grieve some more. Grieve in a way that is true to your being. It's just as untrue to grieve when you're not feeling it as not to grieve when you are feeling it. Grieving is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It takes courage to go through it. At the same time, again, take care of yourself. Grief comes in waves. It can seem to be over and then come back and overwhelm you. You may feel like you're the one who is dying, and some part of you may be, or you may experience guilt. I should have done more. anger, or loneliness. This is the time to remember that everything, even grief, is impermanent. It will transform into something else. Change may come in an aha moment, or it may be a series of small insights, but it will come. And if you don't grieve fully in a way that's true to your own heart, you may end up with cynicism about life and fear of future involvement, fear of taking any risk in relationship. Be kind to yourself. When it's time to let go, you'll know. Then let go. The memories will still be there without the attachment. It's not about returning to normal, but becoming someone new, free to be present for whatever your life is now. I asked him, do you remember Rabbi Alan Lew? He was a friend. We taught together. Norman Fisher taught with us also. And they brought together the teachings of Buddhist and Jewish spirituality. After Alan died suddenly, Norman wrote, "Loss wounds the heart, causing it to fall open. Love rushes into and out of the opening. Love that was probably there all along, but you didn't notice because you were busy with so many things that you couldn't feel it. Love rushes in to the absence left by loss. And that love brings inspired action. If we're able to give ourselves to the loss, to move toward it instead of away, our wounded hearts become full." Ramdas says, loss, move toward it instead of away from it. Yeah, Norman knew. Norman loved the rabbi, he said. He did, very much. Looking out at the hibiscus, the coconuts ripening at the tops of the palm trees, the bright red tea leaves, agave, papaya, Norfolk pines, they could heal grief, I think. I knew someone who went on a pilgrimage. I recall walking 200 miles to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And somewhere along the route, she cried and cried, and then she felt her grief lift. Ramdas says, some people do special practices like that, and some just go through life hoping and waiting for the grief to change. This is good. John Perry Barlow said that when he was grieving, he's a poet and writer, lyrics writer for the Dead, and said that when he was grieving, he felt like he was a bottomless well of grief. And you said to him, maybe it's not bottomless, just very deep. One day it will fill with love. That really helped him. I'll read this last paragraph. Ramdas says, well, at some point, and it's different for everybody, we quiet down naturally. We glimpse for the first time a tiny light in the darkness, a first feeling of connection with somebody or something, the possibility of healing into connection again. We begin to move from mourning to remembering, from mourning to remembering. I walked downstairs, remembering that Annie Lamott said, losing a loved one is like having a broken leg that never heals perfectly, that still hurts when the weather gets cold, but you learn to dance with the limp. So great. In the kitchen, I talk with Dasi and Lakshman, who take care of Ramdas, enjoying their liveliness, happy I'm not grieving their loss. What do we have to eat? Some apple cake left over from last night. It tastes alive and delicious. I am grateful to be here now. So that's all I have. Life and death. Do you have, I mean, there's more, but I've just been talking a lot. How about, do you have some questions?
Thank you so much, Mirabai. Somebody sent me a chat and said, boy, this must be bringing up a lot of memories. Felt like I just went on a little tour of my life here also. So thank you so much for that. There is a question here, and the person is asking this question. Let's see, where did it go to? How does somebody deal with the sudden death of a 5-year-old child that was healthy and just loved living life? Yeah.
It's hard to even hear. Every spiritual and religious tradition says that the worst suffering a human can have in this lifetime is their child dying before they do. And I know close friends and others who've lost their children. Um, in the book, actually, there are 2 letters that Ram Dass wrote to parents who asked that very question. It's, forcing us into the space of not knowing. There's no way in which you can understand the, why, how, the rightness of this happening. It requires a role, letting go into not knowing and to trusting that, and it's hard to say because I don't mean it in any way to sound superficial, but that child, that as a soul, that child that being had reached the end of what they're supposed to be doing here in this lifetime, in this body. It's a really hard thing to come to, but it also is a way of understanding how this can happen. And Ram Dass talks in the book also about uh, suffering and how suffering can be grace. He someone made a film about him after he had a stroke, and this was really major stroke. He's in a wheelchair. He's paralyzed. He's dead, but he was paralyzed on one side. He couldn't do anything for himself. Couldn't even go to the bathroom by himself, and he lost his language for a long time. And he was in a lot of pain. And he came to finally accept that this is what he was given. This is what he had. And that there were huge lessons for him to learn from it. And so someone made a film about it, calling it Fierce Grace. So Ram Dass said, this is fierce grace. I was given this, and it is true that he learned so much that I wonder whether he ever would have learned if it hadn't been for having to deal with so much suffering. I think that as time goes on, in as much as you can learn from the suffering of the grief of that loss, you begin to grow in ways that allow you to be better able to hold it. But mostly, I'm so sorry for whoever it is. It's really, I had one child, but I have one grandchild, and every time I hear something like this, of course, I just imagine, if it were to happen to Dahlia, and I just, I think with all my teachers and practicing, and I don't know if any of it would help me at that time. But but we keep trying and keep doing what we know to do to grow from it and to grow into love, have that space that feels like only loss, have it be this opening, that can be filled by love.
Mm. Thank you so much, Mirabai. I think that's just such a beautiful way to try to hold that space. And I just so appreciate your honesty about all of your practices and all of your spiritual practices, not knowing in a time like that how they might help you through that time. I think that's such an honest response to that situation. And I know that we had a mutual friend whose child died unexpectedly at less than 2 years old, a healthy child. And I know that at least one of the parents, they did a lot of searching outside of their normal, their normal toolkits of how to manage things. And I think for one of them, I know that just allowing herself to be in the amount of grief she was actually in and not trying to look better for other people so they would feel more comfortable.
Yeah.
It's one way that they managed that she was able to manage that. And of course, both parents managed it quite differently. But yeah, thank you so much for that. Really, it's really hard. And if anybody here, if that is their situation, and you will have my email, you are welcome to send me an email and I will see what I could do to connect you to like national supports. There's national supports for parents whose child has died.
It's so much more common than I realized that the first book reading I did was in Sausalito, and Norman Fisher came and did it with me. It was great. But and the audience was small. There's maybe 50 people or something. There were 5 people in the audience who had lost a child. Yeah.
A lot of grief in the room. There's another question that I'm assuming that because it was sent to me that they would like me to ask you instead of asking themselves. The question is, do you believe, and maybe another way to, have you had an experience that there is some sort of energy or other method of communication to us here from the afterlife or a parallel universe that we may be close to but not in, or that kind of communication, maybe metaphysical communication or other ways that people might want to think about that?
I don't know. And I'm a very grounded kind of person. I've not had that experience, but I do know that I do have friends who have, one I think of in Mill Valley, who lost a child and very clearly had, she worked with a psychic, so very clearly had communication with this child. I mean, I allow that all of that is possible. I mean, we don't know how, thick the veil is between us and other dimensions. I don't. Ram Dass, of course, really was sure that, that there were other beings, and he had this one being he talked to a lot, who would say things to him about dying. One was, don't worry about it. It's like taking off a tight shoe. It was good.
Yeah.
And yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I allow for that possibility, and and I do know that, it has really helped some people. So that's don't, if it seems like something you want to explore, do it.
Yeah, for anybody that might be interested in this, maybe close to the question, a little bit different, but on May 6th, which it turns out is just a little while from now, we are hosting Dr. Christopher Kerr, and he is a medical director for a hospice in Buffalo, New York. And he has spent the last 10 or 15 years working with his patients who have spoken about this dream they have of their loved ones who have died before they did, and now are appearing to them in what they say is a dream, but not really a dream because it seems so real, and giving them, information and conversation. So on May 6th, he's going to talk about his research and about what that, how people have reacted to that, how the families, how that's helpful, or in some cases, maybe not helpful. And I'm so grateful that there's people actually looking at this now, these kind of phenomenon.
Yeah, that is really great. Dreams, I've had, so it's been over a year now, but I've just had one dream about Ram Dass, but it was really great. We were sitting in a circle, like kind of circle we would have if we were teaching a workshop or something. And and we were waiting for someone to come. And excuse me. So there was one person between him and me. And I reached around behind that person and I touched Ram Dass's hand. And just when I did that, I got this all over full body feeling of just incredible rightness and comfort and happiness. I just felt so good all over. And then he leaned back a little from his position, and I leaned back, and we looked at each other, and he said, "I'm here." And that was all. And I felt like that's all I needed, just in case I had doubted it. I'm here. And in one way or another, that is true of all our beloveds who have died. They're here. However you understand their being here. And that was very reassuring. Yeah. Oh, and I thought of, what was it other? Oh, there's of course been all this work done on what's it called? Almost dying. What's that called? When people almost die and then
Type thing.
What?
A near-death experience, NDE.
Yeah. And so a friend was at Fetzer Institute was doing some international research on it, because all the stories we read, usually, you're going into the white light and then something happens and you turn around, you have more work to do. But it's cultural, it turns out. And that, you probably know this, but in India, they did research in India, and every person who had a near-death experience had the same experience, which was they went to, there was someone there, they went toward the next, I don't remember if there's a bright white light or not, but there's someone sitting at a desk with a big book, a little bit like Notions of Heaven, maybe, but with a big book. And if you've ever been in India or know anything about it, there's endless red tape in India. The phrase red tape comes from when the British were in India. I one time opened a door in a government office for, I don't know why, but we were there to look for something. And there were like thousands of piles of paper, all neatly tied up with red tape. But so they're the government anyhow, it's extremely bureaucratic, leftover from the Raj, I'm sure. But anyhow, what people experience when they have near-death experiences in India is they go there and there's somebody with a book, and he is looking through the book and can't find your name, and then says something like, "There's been a mistake. It was somebody else with your name, but your name is not here. You have to go back."
That's amazing. That is incredible. That's really incredible.
So maybe it'll be a white light, maybe not.
I've always wondered, I've not always, but I've sometimes wondered if the folks that are coming back to do the more work, like just overachievers, because that just sets you out like type A. They're going to come back because they've got stuff that's not finished yet. Oh my God, that yes. Yes, and somebody just put up in the chat, also in the Reformed Jewish tradition, there is the reference to the Book of Life that will be reviewed.
Exactly.
So, yes. Yeah. Somebody is asking, Mirabai, what page was the quote that you read? Oh, no, that's Annie Lamont's quote about dancing with the limb.
Oh,
correct? About that's not in your book. Is the Annie Lamont quote in your?
No, it is in the book. And
Okay.
after I'll find it and tell you later.
Okay.
So
Yeah, somebody just asked in the chat.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to say for people that would like to ask a question, because I'm sure that Mirabai would be interested in interacting with people that are here instead of just me. The way to raise your hand and chat in a Zoom, if that's not something that you know how to do, is to move your cursor to the bottom or top of your screen, and there'll be a place for newer versions of Zoom that says reactions. And if you click right on that smiley face, it will give you some things. One of them is raise your hand, and you could do that. Some people in older versions under the participant button will have that option. So there's a question. Yeah. Yeah. And so in the chat, there's another question from Lakshman, and I'm wondering if you would like to ask that question, Lakshman, just go ahead. What I'd like to do is if you've raised your hand, then I can actually pin you so that you and Mirabai will look like you're speaking to each other. Would you like to ask that question, or would you prefer me to ask? Lakshman has the hand up. Okay, I'm going to unmute the audience now so people can ask questions. Let me move you here so we will look like you are speaking to each other. And why don't you go ahead? Thank you. You could unmute yourself.
I didn't know you were here. For the rest of you, Lakshman's a star of this book.
No, I'm not. No. Okay, so I'm hesitant to ask this question because I feel like it makes me look bad, but
all the more reason to ask it.
So you were saying because your mother-in-law had COVID, and so my mom had COVID, and has Alzheimer's. She's in a facility close by, and I go and see her. But this was during the height of the COVID, and they had locked down the facility, and I heard that she had it. She didn't have any symptoms, thank God. But then I had this relative reach out to me, and I was talking to all kinds of people, but she was like, I hope she feels cared for. And it's just this little zinger that's just sort of stuck with me. And I guess I'm just sort of seeking out any kind of advice about how to deal with other people's judgment about, how I'm handling someone dying, and how, or she's not dying yet, but somebody's elderly condition. I mean, I just was talking to my therapist earlier today about this. So,
all through COVID, there's been a lot of judgment, and with my own son, he thought we were being protective. Christmas, I said, you can come and we have a heater on the back porch, and we can come for a couple of hours, and we'll put the tree on the back porch, and we can, and he just, he's smart, he's like your age, and he thought that was outrageous, that they couldn't come and stay overnight and so on. He's out in the world working all the time, and I'm 81. So, and Christmas was long before any vaccines. So yeah, I saw that. And then I started hearing stories about people it was all new, and we started judging each other. And that one I think well, you
Love,
know,
love, love.
I mean, it just, yeah, it's just let it go, you know, that, uh, that's not obviously a helpful act on her part toward you. And, you know, I would just work on, you know, letting it go with love. And knowing, you know, just going back and knowing that whatever you did, it sounds like you did everything you could do. I mean, having been in that same situation, but um, uh, going back and, you know, just feeling, you know, did I do everything I could have? And if not, you know, the self-compassion practice, you know, um, I did the best I could, you know,
Yeah.
and imagine,
I mean,
imagine
there's a lot of that, right? Doing the best you can do, and sometimes it looks like,
yeah, because we've never done this before.
yeah,
It's all new. And it's not just new for you, it's new for everybody around you, you
yeah,
know? And probably that criticism was coming out of her fear that your mother wasn't okay, you know?
yeah.
But yeah, I think we need to give each other a lot of extra space around this, you know, a lot of extra forgiveness. Um, and letting go your own judgment of her for judging you, you know,
Oh yeah.
because it's been hard on everybody.
Thank you.
And I would say that I found with EJ's mom that dementia actually helped her through COVID. She said, "Have you gotten your now we're doing Zoom with her, but have you gotten your shots yet?" We say one day, and she said, "Yes, I got my fourth one today." Great. They're really taking care of you.
Oh,
Golden Retriever.
bless her. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Don't feel bad. You are you are one of the great humans on the planet.
You. Thank you.
And I love you.
I love you. Thanks. Thank you.
And there's a couple of people here that have put things up in the chat thanking you for asking that question. So you're not alone in people maybe feeling that way by people making comments that may be not as thoughtful as they are thinking they're making. And also a suggestion from somebody saying that I might reply that I am, she's feeling as much as anyone can feel supported during this very difficult time. I'm sure she is. Yeah, it's hard. I really thank you for that question. And I will see. And also, Vashu is here if you've seen him in the audience here. And let's see. Karen Latina, Karen, would you, your camera is off, I'd imagine for a reason, but if you would like to be, if you'd like to be spotlighted, if you turn your camera on, then I'd be able to do that.
Can I keep my camera off?
Please do, for sure.
Okay.
Karen's one of our people.
I'm just like, I'm in full COVID, you know, garb right now. Like, I meaning not meaning like I have my PPE on, but like my hair is kind of a mess and been in the same clothes for a couple of days. So anyway, my question is just maybe a silly one, but that's my dog. Sorry. I'm very curious to know about the origins of your name. I'm a studier of names, and I've never heard Mirabai before, and I was just wondering, does it have a special meaning or significance? And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
It's an Indian name. It's a fairly common name in India. The original Mirabai was a queen in the 15th century. She left home and all her worldly palace and so on, and wrote poems which are still sung in India and have been translated by a number of Western poets, Robert Bly and others, Jane Hirschfield. She sang poets, she wrote poems and sang. They were love poems to God. She was devoted to Krishna. And so she's known, in Hinduism, which our teacher was Hindu, although he was outside all of it, but she in Hinduism, you can love God as, you know, an old man with long white hair, as a young man, as a woman, as a child. And or you can love God as your lover. And Mirabai was the embodiment of what they call erotic bhakti. Bhakti is the yoga of devotion. So she was the embodiment of loving God as your lover. So I was young. I thought it was a great name. Um, and uh, yeah, and
Well,
it's because his message to us was to love everyone, that and serve everyone. That just deepened it for me. And the practice is to live into the name. Like Ram Dass's name means servant of God. So he like would always ask, what does that mean? What should I be doing? You know? And so that's my name.
It's beautiful. Thank
I
you.
loved it. My name was Linda, and I never really related to it, which I didn't know until he gave me that name. And from the day he gave it to me, it just was my name. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. We have David Brown from Port Townsend. David, why don't you, if you lower your hand, I'll lower your hand and I will put you here if that's okay with you. And if you are on mute, there you go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, great. Hey, sorry, the sun's hitting my iPad. I can't seem to get a good picture, but yeah, I wanted to ask you, my wife had a cancer diagnosis last October, a pretty severe form of sarcoma, and it really knocked me down, really knocked the legs out of me. And she's doing okay now. She had an operation, things are fine, but and it really knocked me down. And I remembered a lot of anxiety and fear came up. And I remember Ram Dass or Stephen Levine, one of the things they talked about was trust, and that you really don't know how things are going to come out. Like you just don't. I think Ram Dass used to say that you don't have the God's eye on how things are going to turn out. I tried to use that as a coping mechanism, I guess, to get through that period, and it did help. But this whole idea of trust, it's kind of stuck with me through this whole experience. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on trust. I know you mentioned it once earlier in passing. And if there's anything you could say that could help me with this inquiry, this internal inquiry into trust. Thank you.
First, I want to say that I had a very good friend named David Brown, and he died. And so when she said, since we've been talking about voices from beyond, when she said David Brown, I thought, wow, he chose this forum. So thank you. Yeah, it's trust. It's not trust. The trust we want to cultivate is not trust that things will all be fine, that they'll all come out the way we want them to. It's a deeper kind of trust in the unfolding, appreciating that although it doesn't always seem that way, that things are unfolding exactly as they should, and we don't know how it's going to come out. And so, but what we've got in the present moment, whatever that is, then that, you know, that she was really at risk of dying and maybe in pain, and you didn't want that, and you were feeling all the things you were feeling during that time. but there it was. There it was. So like seeing it, and then what is the trusting that um, within you, you do know what is the best response to the moment at every moment, you know, and then um, and then trusting that the way it came out, you've got, you two have, as Ram Dass would say, you have more work to do together, you two, you know, and that if she had died, that you'd be on different planes together, wouldn't be here together. But just since we can't change the moment, it's what, here we are, um, that cultivating a res, kind of responsiveness within our awareness so that we can respond with compassion and wisdom to whatever is given to us. Um, and Ram Dass would talk a lot about trusting that he was given his stroke for for a reason, and that and here he was given this stroke, so he was the only one who could respond to it, and so he must have what it takes to respond to that, whatever that meant, and in that case it took a long time before he could accept it, and then once he accepted it, he had to figure out how to work with it, and have it. So yeah, it's trusting that things are unfolding as they should, and that you you might not have all the ultimate wisdom to know what to do, but whatever it is you have to respond to that, um, that's enough. You're enough. You have what who you are to respond to this moment, and you do your best, and then that leads to the next thing. I don't know if that helps, but that's a great smile.
Yeah, thank you so much. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, David. You also look so much like somebody who's in a morning writing class that I'm involved with every morning. He could be your doppelganger. There's a David Brown in that class. When you came on, I was like, oh my goodness. So does anybody else have any questions or just, anything that they'd like to share? I've been thinking about something, I was thinking about how was it for you, Mirabai, when your teacher died? And for Ram Dass, how did you, I'd imagine at that point it's, there's been plenty of people I've been with that I knew they were going to die. So I wasn't surprised they died, but I was really shocked when they died. There's something shocking about the life not being here anymore, that essence being gone, even if the body is still there. And so I'm just curious what, if there's anything that you might say about that. I remember when Stephen died, I got a phone call from a really good friend, Andrea, who was otherwise occupied. And he told me, and I was in the grocery store in the produce section of the Berkeley Bowl, and I just remember thinking, this is not where you should hear that your teacher died. Not that there's any good place, but this is just, I didn't expect to be holding a thing of bananas and hearing this news that would just be so changing. I mean, he was my friend, and he also told me he was going to die before I saw him again, so I was very grateful for that. But still, just anything that you might share about those experiences.
When Maharaji died, we were very surprised. He just seemed outside all those considerations, we didn't know how old he was, or, he just was so there when we were with him that it never, and we had just, Ram Dass and I and some of the others, we had just come back to the West. I mean, I thought I'd stay for a while, have the baby, we'd make some money, we'd go back to India and be with him again. And Ram Dass had something like that. He had some things to do here. And just at that time, he died. Maharaji died. And But you know, I really, lots of people had really hard time with that. Lots of his students. But I felt like he had really given me everything I needed. And that this was him saying, you know, you've got to do it. I can't do it for you. Um, and you've got everything you need. And um, I'm here, you know, and if you need me. um, and it was, um, his death was okay with me in a really odd way. But in Ramdas, when he died, one thing I learned was that he was so ready to die. And as if you didn't pick up on that, Lakshman was one of his caretakers, one of the reasons he was so ready to die. And, you know, we'd gone through all the stuff about exactly how he wanted to die and what, and how we said, oh, what do you want us to do with your ashes, Ramdas? He said, well, he said, after he wanted to be cremated outdoors, but that didn't work out. But he said, so after I'm cremated, just take a small container, you know, like one of those takeout, those little white takeout containers they give in Chinese restaurants, and put my ashes in it. And then he wanted some in the ocean and some in Taos, New Mexico. So he had thought about those aspects of his death, and but also he had been doing so much work to be ready to be, as he said, you know, death is a moment. There's this moment, we're talking on Zoom, and then there'll be the moment later we'll be asleep, and the moment by moment we'll be doing. He said, death is a moment, you know, at that moment we're dying. He said, I'm ready. He also, I mean, his body was a wreck and he had a lot of pain, but he never complained about it, you know, and he was ready whenever it came. And that I realized later, that when he died, I felt sadness, of course, because he's not here anymore. We can't play together. But I didn't really feel like grief or loss. And I think it was because we all knew that he was so ready and that he was really peaceful and okay with it. And so we didn't have those feelings of like, oh, if only we had said this or that, or you know, I could have done that for him. And he really wanted to do certain more things. He wanted to write another book, or see a certain person before he died, or forgive somebody, or any of the things that people die with. He didn't die with any of that, and so it felt so right. And so I thought, what a gift to us, because, you know, I didn't have any of those feelings. And now he did remind me in a dream, I'm here. And but I made a kind of commitment that I would do everything I could to die that way. Not just for me. I've been thinking that we should do all this for ourselves so we're peaceful when we die, right? But I realize it's a gift to those who love us, you know, if we die in peace and ease. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I absolutely, yes, that of course, this is why I for community education, but sort of this idea that if people turn towards the idea of death and can engage with that long before, not because they're in the emergency room getting a terrible diagnosis, but
Yeah,
long
right
before
now.
that,
Yes.
that gives people an opportunity
Yeah.
to really consider all of these things and to really think about, I think, you know, So often I hear about, friends who are having babies, or my contemporaries, but their children, and how much preparation goes into that for months and months and months, and then people die, and it's like, oh my God, this is the one common thing that every person will have to do, everybody. And it's just so curious to me that we don't have any place. Andrea Levine used to say, why are we learning this like in kindergarten and in third grade and in sixth grade and all through our life? Why isn't this part of the things that we learn about, that we all are going to die, and that we have some ability, some of us, if you're not in dying suddenly, but even people that are dying suddenly, if things are taken care of and they're having conversations with their family, they're not living life full of regret or remorse or unforgiven, something I have to do some work on. But that those are not the things that they're leading their life with. How much better that is for, or maybe better is the wrong word, but just how much more ease there can be for family members in particular that are left behind. So there's another question here. I love this question. Do you think there's such a thing as a good death? And would Ram Dass likely think he had one?
Well, I think Lakshman would agree. He thought he had a good death. He knew he had a good death. But they're good deaths in the way we're just talking about it, in that you're prepared spiritually at every level. Also you've written your will and done all that stuff. And it's different for everybody, the way you want to die. But also, there's a caution that there's this idea of the good death, and that if you don't achieve it, you haven't, oh my God, one more thing I didn't quite do right, both for you and the people you leave behind, So, the good death is really, living your life as fully and as consciously and as lovingly as possible. And preparing to go, recognizing what you can do for the people you're leaving behind, and do that in as conscious a way as you can, and then like being there. But like there's the whole thing around drugs and whether you should take drugs to relieve pain, even though it could mean that you're not conscious when you're dying. You just make the best decisions you can all through it. And it's really important that people don't think there is such a thing as most people do die in hospitals. It's okay. You just, you do it in the best way you can in whatever situation you're in.
Thank you. Yeah, Stephen and Andrea stopped teaching in 1997, 8-ish, because they were concerned that so many people were talking about, oh, so-and-so had a good death and so-and-so didn't have a good death, that, as if there's sort of like a checklist somewhere that we don't know about, that if we check enough boxes, it's a good death. And if we miss some, then and that, people dying aligned with who they are and what their life is about, maybe more a good death. So, thank you. And I think that we are exactly at 5:30, and I'm just making sure that, it looks like all the questions were taken care of that were in the chat. Amazing. And Mirabai, just thank you so very much. I know, see, is George Rosenfeld, I think, came in to join us from, he's living now in Chile, Peru, I think, Peru. And John Vashi was here. So I know that there's people here, lots of people. So I so appreciate this. I really appreciate your talk. I appreciate all of the people that came to hear you today. And just thank you so much. There will be an evaluation that will be sent out just in a little bit. That's my next thing to do. And evaluation. And it's just such a beautiful talk. Thank you, Mirabai. And for anybody that's navigating grief or loss in our service area, which is San Mateo and Santa Clara County, please do be in touch. We do have great resources in our bereavement department. And for anybody that has any needs around end-of-life support, please do be in touch. You'll have my email after this. So, Mirabai, thank you so much to all of you for joining us. Thank you also.
And the link to the podcast, which is about walking each other home. It's about how important friendship is as we wake up. And also, there, if you're interested in more about Ram Dass, there is tons of information on his website, which is ramdass.org. I mean, more than you could imagine. And also, a memoir has just been published by a good friend who worked with him on it for 10 years. And it's a great read. It's a great story. It's called Being Ram Dass. I don't know if you can see it. So I'll send you some links.
Great, and I'll include that information also. And yes, for somebody just, and Santu, I'll answer that as we sign off. So thank you all for being here. I hope to see you again at one of our Mission Hospice events, and be well, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mirabai. And I know that you need to go. I'll be here for a little bit. Need to kind of debrief a little bit. You're welcome to stay, but thank you, Mirabai.
Thank you. Loved being here. Bye.
Do it again. Bye. There's everybody. And I'm going to stop the recording now. Thank you all.